Hello everyone, investment scams rampant. Please vigilant and discerning. Do not trust information from unknown sources. Please make sure to recognize two official Capital Securities community, Facebook, Capital Securities, YouTube, Capital Wealth Insights.
Hello everyone, welcome to Kunyi. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, December 24th. I'm analyst Jang Jita. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with us at 3 different times. If you have any investment questions, feel free to leave a comment. If I don't get a chance to answer today, I'll reply to everyone one by one on the show the day after tomorrow, Friday. Tonight is Christmas Eve, and tomorrow is Christmas Day. The stock market will be closed for a day, so just a reminder, tomorrow's Kunyi Goodnight program will also be paused for a day. Of course, I also want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas. May you have peace and joy. Speaking of Christmas, in a bit I'll talk with everyone about the origins of Christmas and share some fun facts. Actually, in Taiwan, a lot of people celebrate Christmas, but have forgotten that the real reason for the holiday tomorrow is Constitution Day. So it's possible that many young people don't know this. I've asked some of our younger colleagues, do you know why December 25th, besides being Christmas, is also a national holiday tomorrow? So when I tell them it's Constitution Day, they ask, what is Constitution Day? So a lot of people might not know. Just to add a bit more info for everyone, Christmas on the 25th also happens to be Constitution Day here in Taiwan. Hello everyone, actually there are a lot of things I want to add and share with you all. Good evening to Hui Jun and Frank. Also, Frank mentioned that he just happens to be able to attend the class from home today. Welcome, welcome. Yun Lun and Flying Fish and Melissa, Marisa, right? And to all the staff, good evening. Alice, good evening, good evening, good evening. Everyone, good evening. Hello everyone, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. The economy is outperforming expectations, but there's no rush to cut interest rates. Why? Can the trade war really take off again? Even though the economy is beating expectations, there's still no eagerness to cut rates. Logically, based on last night's data, the US third quarter GDP exceeded market expectations, and personal consumption expenditures also much higher than anticipated. Even the core PCE inflation for quarter 3 did not rise significantly. Logically, in this kind of situation where the economy is doing extremely well, it means one thing: the US economy is not heading for a hard landing. Since there's no hard landing, logically, the Federal Reserve doesn't need to rush to cut interest rates, right? So if there's no need to rush to cut rates, why is that? I'm saying it still hasn't affected the overall momentum for rate cuts next year. Today, I'll also share some additional comments from Trump and Hassett. So the economic performance is actually pretty good. I'm just telling everyone that we haven't headed toward a hard landing. But honestly, when it comes to monetary policy, next year is still likely to be relatively loose. Besides that, what exactly does it mean to really enforce a flight ban? And what does it have to do with the trade war? This company in this round of the US-China trade war over these many years is kind of a side story. It's been affected. This company actually holds a 90% global market share for its products. So why did Trump bring up banning this company's products today? Who's really paying attention to this? Also, on the industry side, when it comes to weight loss, which option should you choose? There are two major types of weight loss. In this market, one medication is from Eli Lilly, and the other is from Novo Nordisk. Their related weight loss drugs are selling like crazy, selling extremely well. But when you compare them in the market, Eli Lilly still holds a higher market share right now. That's why we've seen Eli Lilly's stock price keep hitting new highs, while Novo Nordisk has kept hitting new lows. But today, there's some good news related to Novo Nordisk. Novo Nordisk has received approval from the US Food and Drug Administration. What did the FDA approve? They approved an oral version, an oral weight loss drug. So what does this mean for Eli Lilly or for Novo Nordisk's stock price at this stage? After this oral medication gets approved, will it disrupt the whole market? Will this reshuffle the entire weight loss drug market? That's what we'll be talking about today. Another major focus in the market is whether TSMC is going to raise prices for its advanced chips. Why is this being discussed? Because today there was news that China's Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, SMIC, is reportedly planning to increase prices for some of its products by 10%. So could this potentially drive up TSMC's chip prices as well? Tonight, I'll be giving you my take on all these related updates. Hello everyone, hope you're all having fun. Good evening to I Love Jolin and also Caesar. Merry Christmas to you both and to everyone else as well. Merry Christmas everyone. It'll go by quickly. After Christmas, we'll be facing New Year's, and once New Year's comes, it'll be 2026. So time really flies. You see everyone says goodnight in the group, and then you just keep watching the show, and before you know it, time has passed so fast. I've noticed that the older I get, the faster time seems to go by. When I was younger, I didn't feel like time passed so quickly. Back when I was a student studying acting, it didn't feel this way. Every day I thought, wow, Christmas is over. Now it's nearly New Year's. And after New Year's, wow, it's time for classes in school. Then eventually you look forward to winter break, which felt far away, and then summer break. It felt like time passed slower because every day was playing, having fun, studying, writing, and preparing for exams. But I found that after entering the workforce and starting to work, especially as I get older, it feels like there's never enough time. I don't even know why. It just gets especially hard. The older you get, the busier you become. And the busier you are, the faster time seems to fly by. So before you know it, it's already 2024, 2025, and now this year, you're about to step into 2026. No matter how everyone has done in the past few years, let's just look forward to 2026. I hope everyone does better and better on their investment journey. Now let's take a look at some economic data. At 9:30 p.m., there's a U.S. jobless claims report, a key economic indicator. This high-frequency data point comes out regularly in the U.S. Initial jobless claims previous was 224,000, forecast similar. Continuing claims previous was nearly 1.897 million, forecast slight increase to 1.9 million. Overall, weekly initial jobless claims data usually falls between 210,000 and 230,000. This range hasn't changed lately. The number of continuing claims has also stayed around 1.9 million. So at around 9:30, we'll take a look together to see whether the overall job market continues to weaken or just stays the same. Just keep in mind, as long as inflation doesn't spike or get out of control, if CPI, PPI, or PCE data remains controlled and the market continues to weaken, non-farm payrolls, unemployment rate, or labor force participation are weak, then the job market is soft. Under this law of two sides of the seesaw, the Fed will continue to carry out interest rate cuts. Let me say it again. As long as inflation doesn't get out of control and the market continues to be weak, as long as inflation is under control and the market stays weak, then the Fed will keep cutting rates next year, okay? All right, now let me add a bit about the official stance. First, regarding economic data, besides looking at attendance in a moment, let's talk about the ADP small non-farm payrolls. Right now, it's released about every week, and there's also a monthly report each month. So there are both weekly and monthly reports. For the weekly report, it's released every Tuesday. What does the ADP weekly report say? It says that in the past 4 weeks, as of December 6th, in the private sector, on average, there were 11,500 new job opportunities added each week. In fact, that's a slight decrease compared to last week's 17,500, but overall it's still growing. This means that, at least according to ADP statistics for the private sector, the overall job market remains stable and solid. Additionally, the economic advisor Hassett, who is also a hot candidate for next year's Fed chair, he said in his speech that as long as GDP can stay at 4% going into the new year, like we saw yesterday, the third quarter GDP is currently around 3.5 to 3.8, which is still performing pretty well. Then, according to Hassett, if GDP can stay at 4% through next year, then the entire job market could see monthly employment numbers return to an increase of 100,000 to 150,000 non-farm jobs each month. He also believes that the Fed is basically done. In terms of rate cuts, the Fed is clearly lagging behind the market's expectations for it, and this situation is still relatively mild. So why did I just tell everyone that even if the economic data is better than expected, it still won't affect next year's rate cuts? First, next year's Fed chair, whether it's Hassett, Waller, or Walsh, will all be carrying out Trump's will. And Trump himself tends to be more dovish, so he will intervene deeply in the Federal Reserve's operations. Whether it's the appointment of committee members, the chair, or other board members, all these appointments will be made to ensure they listen to Trump and are more dovish. Today, Trump specifically added that if the upcoming committee members or the next Fed chair don't agree with his views, if they're more hawkish and don't support his dovish stance on rate cuts, then they absolutely won't be chosen as chair. He hopes that in the future, when the market is doing well, rate cuts can be implemented rather than taking actions that would harm the market. He's referring to the current chair, Powell, and his related actions. So overall, I think yesterday's fund data performed better than expected, but that just tells us the US economy hasn't gone into a hard landing. Even though the job market is somewhat weak, we can see that whether it's GDP or consumer spending is still relatively strong. Overall, the GDP and the economy remain solid. As for next year's rate cuts, it's likely to be a gradual process rather than an aggressive one, meaning they won't necessarily cut rates every month or every quarter. Based on the current economic situation, if things continue to go well, there's no need for that. If the job market continues to weaken, at most, it will prompt the Federal Reserve to keep moving toward rate cuts next year. But whether those cuts will become urgent, that's not necessarily the case. It won't necessarily be urgent, but the direction will still be toward rate cuts. It's just that, under the premise of strong economic data, the Fed's momentum for cutting rates will gradually taper off, but it won't stop entirely. The move toward rate cuts won't even be particularly aggressive. Just thinking about it this way is enough. So next year, I still think the outlook is relatively dovish, leaning toward dovishness, and that shouldn't be a problem. All right, good evening to Louis Yang, and also to Jeffrey Ye, good night, and Kay Coco, Merry Christmas to you too. Hey, today is Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, I remember back then, ying ying, meidetsi too. At night, I remember that in the past, on Christmas Eve, we would often go to those, sometimes churches would have events. Both Christian and Catholic churches seem to have activities. And on Christmas Eve, kids would love to go, right? They'd go, and I think they'd hand out candy or prepare some, what do you call it? There would be some theater performances, and they'd put on shows like the story of Jesus' birth, the story of Jesus being born in the manger. And then there were the three, what are they called? The three wise men. And when they saw the star and all that, they'd act out that scene for the kids. So the kids would be really happy, eating candy and cookies, lots of them. So in my memory, every Christmas, the church would usually have events like that, especially on Christmas Eve. There would also be things like prayer meetings or some theater performances, and the kids all loved going. And then for Christmas tomorrow, maybe this church will also have some special events in Taiwan. So if anyone is interested in these kinds of activities, you might as well go and experience the Christmas atmosphere. But overall, we still want to tell everyone that anyway, whether it's committee members, officials, or commentators, even Trump, they all tend to be more dovish. So next year, the whole Christmas vibe will probably continue. The whole new year will continue like this. But when we talk about the Christmas rally, next year still looks more favorable, both for the economy and for the stock market. So what do we call this? Good evening, good night. Also to add that Treasury Secretary Besson is quite interesting. He suggested that the Fed's inflation target could be adjusted to between 1.5 and 2.5, or even 1 to 3. So why did he make this argument? Because right now, whether the Fed cuts or raises interest rates, a major goal is to see inflation come down to 2%. So 2% is an anchor figure for central banks around the world. In other words, if inflation is above 2%, it means inflation might be heating up. If inflation stays at 2%, it means inflation is still relatively stable. Okay, so anything above 2% is a major reason why central banks everywhere are trying hard to bring inflation down to 2%. They will use various means to achieve this. They control interest rates, raising or lowering them to bring overall inflation down to that anchored value of 2%. Now, what bats in it means is that we shouldn't just stick rigidly to 2%. You don't have to be dead set on exactly 2%. You could set it a bit higher, maybe up to 2.5%, or a bit lower, like 1.5%, or even up to 3%. That's all possible. What does that mean? It means that if right now inflation, whether it's the CPI or the PCE level, is around 2.5%, 2.6%, or even about 2.8%, all the way up to 3%, that's still acceptable. What this means is that as long as inflation stays within the 1 to 3% range, it shows that inflation isn't out of control. And since inflation isn't out of control, it means the Federal Reserve should actively move to cut interest rates. It's not that they have to wait until it hits 2% before taking action. If they wait until 2, maybe it'll be too late. So he hopes the Fed can broaden its inflation target range a bit, give it a little more flexibility. If it's between 1 and 3%, then even now when it's close to 3%, it's still within a controllable range. That's what he means. Of course, whether this view will carry over to next year's new Fed chair or other officials, we don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Anyway, that's what Blinder, Burtson, and Hassett think. Both Hassett and Burson, or even Trump, are actually more on the dovish side. Just wanted to add a little more about these officials for everyone. Oh, and someone mentioned they're Christian. Okay, Merry Christmas, Happy Birthday. Yeah, Merry Christmas. And who is this? Stretch your paw. Is it Stretch Claw Chan 2052? Good evening, happy birthday everyone, Merry Christmas, and then, alright, so what about the 10-year Treasury yield? It's 4.151. The 10-year government bond yield is 4.15, and the median rate is holding at 3.6. As for the number of rate cuts next year, it appears there will be about 2 more. I think there will probably be 1 rate cut in the first half of the year, around March to June, and then another one in the second half, likely before the election in November, next year's midterm elections. Next year, the U.S. House and Senate will have their midterm elections. I believe that before the November election, maybe a few days before, or anyway, definitely before the election, they'll have to do some rate cuts. If you cut rates before the election, that's how you get the poll numbers. You attract the stock market to go up, the economy heats up, and then when borrowing costs for the public and businesses go down, people are more likely to vote for the Republicans. So I think if there are 2 rate cuts next year, one of them will probably happen right before the election. That's why he treats it as a great tool for winning votes. So I think in the second half of next year, there will at least be one rate cut specifically for the election. When the time comes, we can verify exactly which month it happens. My guess is that there will probably be a rate cut close to October. As for the US dollar, it slipped slightly by 0.05%. But in the short term, it's still relatively weak, mainly because most of the officials are leaning more dovish. Of course, Trump is very aggressive when it comes to rate cuts, so the US dollar continues to be relatively weak. Now, regarding geopolitical risks, let me talk a bit about a few things related to that. For example, will there really be a no-fly zone? Who exactly is that referring to? Basically, it's like a side story to the US-China trade war. All right, the US-China trade war has affected a lot of industries, and many companies have been put on the restricted list, right? And now there's another one. Who is it this time? It's DJI, the drone company. DJI drones. If you've ever played with drones, whether it's commercial drones or consumer drones for personal use, DJI dominates the global market with a 90% market share. Their drones sell extremely well. They're really good, and they're not expensive either, so the cost-performance ratio is very high. Now, the US Federal Communications Commission has said that because DJI drones, including those made outside of China, that is non-US made drones, there may be some national security concerns. So what they're saying is, because of national security risks and concerns, not just DJI, but all drones and parts made outside the US, basically any non-US made drones and components worldwide, will be put on a control list. In the future, the US may ban their import, marketing, and sales, and even reserve the right to take retrospective action. What does retrospective action mean? It means that even those older models, not just the new ones, but even the old models, they can all be monitored, even those that were already sold in the past. Whether it's privately owned or company-owned drones, who knows? One day the Federal Communications Commission might say all of you, because of national security concerns, are banned from use and banned from flying. So will this actually be enforced? I think the chances are pretty low. Why do I think the chances are low? Because DJI drones have a 90% market share. They're not just used by individuals, but also by companies. You can imagine how widespread they are. Globally, the market share is as high as 99%. Some are used in the construction industry. For example, construction companies need to take aerial photos, so they need drones to fly up there. The same goes for the energy sector, for exploration. In agriculture, drones might be needed to spray fertilizers, chemical fertilizers like this, or pesticides. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary to send a drone. You might wonder, teacher, why do you need a drone to spray pesticides? In the US, when it comes to agricultural products like wheat or things like soybeans and corn, their farmlands aren't like those in Taiwan. You might ask, teacher, how big is 1 hectare? How many acres or hectares is that? In Taiwan, farmland isn't that big because the island itself is small. If you go to places like Ilan, Hualien, or Taichung, areas that produce rice or wheat, the fields are divided into sections, one area after another. At most, you might find a slightly larger section at the foot of a mountain, but that's about it. You just need some manpower to do the work, spread some fertilizer, spray some pesticides, and that's it. But that's not the case in the US. The scale of American agriculture and its land is extremely, extremely vast. When they spray pesticides, or even when they need to put out fires, they have to use airplanes flying back and forth. They need to use planes or drones to spray pesticides or apply other treatments from the air. It's not that simple. If you try to do it manually, carrying some materials to spray pesticides, you wouldn't be able to cover it all. The land is just way too vast. We're not talking about just a few hectares here. It's really, really huge. That's why they need drones to do the work. So this applies to agriculture, mining, and there's another very important area as well. All across the United States, many police and fire departments also need drones when they go out on rescue missions, search for suspects, or locate fire sources for rescue operations. DJI drones are used. If the FCC wants to impose a ban or restriction, will it really happen? It's very difficult to ban, almost impossible to eliminate. With a 90% market share, it's extremely high. Yeah, DJI, spelled DJI in English, is really cheap and very easy to use. Jeffrey probably uses drones too. Speaking of drones, besides what I just mentioned about all kinds of industries needing drones, I've also noticed that a lot of people play around with drones, because sometimes drones are used to shoot travel videos. I really like traveling all over the place, but I haven't bought a drone yet. Still haven't gotten one. So back in November, remember I went to Hehuan Mountain? I went to climb to the summit, right? And around that time, I also went to another place near Shanlinqi called Dalun Mountain, which is also a spot for watching the Sea of Clouds. The Dalun Mountain platform is a place to view the Sea of Clouds. Let me tell you, at both places, there were people flying drones. So I asked them, hey, are you using drones to film the Sea of Clouds? Everyone buys DJI drones. There's just no need to consider anything else. Seriously, all my friends who buy drones, every single one of them gets a DJI. Why? Because it's easy to use, packed with features, and the price isn't bad. A pretty decent one will run you about 8,000 or 9,000. And if you want something even better, maybe it goes up to 20,000 or 30,000, and you can get something really, really good. And whether it's the image quality, battery efficiency, or flight stability, it's all just really, really good. So when it comes to drones, if you're talking about completely replacing DJI, I think it's really tough. Really tough. Now, another thing, a federal judge in the US has dismissed the US Chamber of Commerce's new motion against Trump. As you know, some foreigners want to work in the US, especially in high-tech industries, and they need to use the H-1B visa. Oh, you might not be Chinese, but for example, Indians, they want to go work in the US, right? So companies have to help them apply for an H-1B visa. This visa used to cost between $2,000 and $5,000. But then Trump said, because there are so many foreign immigrants, and then they were taking jobs from local Americans. So he raised the visa fee to $100,000. Now, you might ask, wouldn't raising it to $100,000 affect American companies? Of course it would. Of course it would affect American companies. So then you might ask, teacher, why did Trump still do this? Because he wanted to protect local American job opportunities. But here's the key point. Because local American jobs pay their employees very high salaries. Let me give you an example. For instance, let's say a high-tech job in Taiwan. A basic salary for an engineer, maybe, I'm talking about the base salary here, maybe the annual salary is 1 million new Taiwan dollars. 1 million NTD is considered the baseline, okay? In places like Hsinchu Science Park or Nankang, 1 million is the basic starting salary. But if you want to hire that person to work in the US, basically the starting salary is 3 million NTD, 3 times as much. So you might think 3 million NTD as a starting salary, isn't that expensive? Actually, in the US, a yearly salary of 3 million NTD is considered low. 3 million NTD per year is a low salary in the US. For a normal engineer's annual salary, say at companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and so on, the basic starting salary for engineers, from what I've heard, is basically 5 to 6 million NTD and up. So if a US company wants to hire Chinese, Taiwanese, or Indian people to work in the US, that's the starting point. They might only need to spend 3 million NTD a year, and I'm talking about base salary here, not including stock options or bonuses. Lily and Coco are experts in stock options and bonuses, and maybe their total annual compensation is over 10 million NTD. That's just the baseline. It's actually pretty easy to reach 10 million NTD. So if you bring someone in at 3 million, if you hire them at 3 million NTD. So hiring an Indian or a Taiwanese person, what is your actual cost? Your cost is that hiring a local American might require an annual salary of 600 to 1 million US dollars, but you only need to pay half or even a third of that. So that's why these companies are willing to spend money to bring in so many foreign workers with technical skills. Why do they use the former approach? Because it's cheap, and not only cheap, but also effective. So whether it's American, Taiwanese, or Indian technology, each has its own strengths and weaknesses globally. But since the main consideration is cost, that's why at that time, Trump noticed that many companies were intentionally laying off American workers, cutting local jobs, not because the company was doing poorly, but because after the layoffs, they would turn around and hire people using H-1B work visas. They bring in foreign immigrants to fill these jobs. Why? Because the cost is even lower. So they'd rather spend $2,000 to $5,000 per person on a visa and bring in these foreign workers. Honestly, I think it's the same all over the world, including Taiwan. Taiwan also has foreign migrant workers. Why do they hire workers from Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar, or Indonesia? Because it's cheaper. If you hire a local caregiver versus an Indonesian caregiver, which one is cheaper? Of course, the Indonesian caregiver is cheaper. It's the same logic, and this is the situation everywhere. So what about the future? If wages really reach $100,000, can companies handle it? Of course not. Companies can't handle that. But those who need to use them will still use them. So at this point, companies might negotiate with the Trump administration. How would they negotiate? They might say, okay, I'm willing to invest more and more industries in the US, create more and more job opportunities, but I hope you can relax the restrictions so I don't have to use them. Spending $100,000 on an H-1B visa to hire these foreign workers, of course, I'll keep maintaining 2,000 to 5,000 of them. But the premise is that I have to increase my investment in the US and create more jobs in America. In the end, I think Trump will also loosen up. Why? Because of the AI industry. High-tech is booming. Indeed, American companies have to lower their costs, and they need to hire more and more talented professionals. There's no way they can rely solely on local Americans. First, the cost is too high, and second, there may not be enough talent. So they have to look overseas for development and recruitment. So in the future, I think this issue will gradually be negotiated, and there shouldn't be any major problems in discussing it. As for Trump talking about appointing Louisiana Governor Landry as the special envoy to Greenland, just take it as something to note. It doesn't really have much impact on overall geopolitical risk. As for who actually becomes the envoy to Greenland, well, Trump has always wanted Greenland to become part of the United States. Of course, there are some strategic considerations since it's up by the Arctic Ocean, and there are strategic positions related to the waters of Europe, America, Russia, and so on. Even missile systems are connected to this. Another thing is rare earths, these rare minerals. Greenland also has them. The island has important strategic reserves of rare earth resources. That's why the US has always wanted to acquire Greenland to make it their own. But in the short term, I think this isn't something that'll happen quickly. It'll take a long time to negotiate, and it might not even succeed at all. As for who he appoints as the Greenland envoy, I think it's just something to note and move on. Globally, there's no real consensus or recognition that Greenland would actually become part of the US. It's really just Trump getting all worked up about it. So overall, when we look at geopolitical risks, whether it's what we just talked about, like DJI drones, the federal court's H-1B technology issue, or even Trump bringing up this Greenland thing, oddly, none of these have had much impact on oil prices. Prices haven't heated up. If you ask about this short-term oil price rebound to the 50-day moving average, just treat it as a rebound. Perhaps due to the Venezuela situation, with speculation of a ground operation or US attack pushing oil prices up. The answer remains the same. Venezuela's oil production is currently below 1 million barrels per day, less than 1 million barrels a day. Right now, globally, it ranks about 20th, maybe between 20th and 22nd. So honestly, its impact on the overall global oil supply isn't that significant. So really, even if the US were to attack Venezuela, oil prices would rise in the short term, but it wouldn't be a lasting increase. You should just treat it as a short-term play. It would give a temporary boost, push prices up for a bit. But if you're asking whether in the long run, a war with Venezuela would cause oil prices to surge to $80 a barrel, I think the chances are extremely, extremely low. Pretty much impossible. After all, Trump really wants oil prices to go down, and lower oil prices would certainly help with inflation. Lowering oil prices would also be a plus. Okay, so looking forward to Teacher Zhang's You Want to Travel group sharing. Thank you, Xiao Yayo. Good evening, Xiao Yayo. I'll talk more with everyone when there's a chance. So this is just an additional note on the oil topic. All right, then, let me give you a quick update. So aside from what we did 2 months ago in November, since today's Christmas Eve, let's keep things light. 2 months ago in November, I went to Heiwan Mountain, right? Then last month, which is actually this month, December, we shared with everyone that I went to the Manyue Yuan Forest Recreation Area and also spent 3 days soaking in hot springs in Jiaoxi, remember? So are there any new trips coming up? Yes, there will be more. We'll plan them as we go. Whenever we have time off, we'll arrange to go out and explore, just take some trips here and there. Of course, while making these plans, we just mentioned to everyone that today is Christmas Eve. Tomorrow is Christmas, right? Do you all know the origin of Christmas? You all know it's December 25th, the birth of Jesus. So when it comes to the origin of Christmas, I used to wonder about something. I wonder if any of you have ever thought about this. There's a kind of bug here, just like a bug in a computer that you can't get past. So what's the bug? I've always been thinking about this. The Gregorian calendar. You know, we talk about BC and AD, right? BC means before Jesus was born, and AD is after Jesus was born. That's how the Western system works. BC is before Christ, and AD is after Christ's birth. So before Jesus was born, it's called BC, right? That's the usual way of dividing it. But here's the key point. AD seems to start from like the first year of the Gregorian calendar, January 1st. So logically, if we're dividing time based on before and after Jesus' birth, if it's before or after the Common Era, then why is Christmas the day of Jesus' birth? Why isn't Christmas on January 1st? Has anyone ever thought about this question? Why is Christmas on December 25th and not on January 1st? Since the division between BCE and CE is based on before and after Jesus' birth, logically, January 1st should be Christmas, right? So why is it December 25th? I just couldn't figure it out, so I started looking into it. And of course, the information I found is a mix of truth and speculation, and there's still room for discussion, but I did read quite a bit about it. The reason is about why December 25th is chosen. It's considered Christmas and not January 1st. He said, you know, because back in the time of the Roman Church, before the Roman Church actually, the Romans were always persecuting Christians, ever since Jesus was born and after the rise of Christianity. The Roman Empire kept persecuting Christians. Many Christians, as we say, became martyrs. Then, around the 3rd to 4th century AD, there was an emperor named Constantine, Emperor Constantine the Great. So what did he do? Before him, many of the previous emperors persecuted Christians, but Constantine, around the 3rd to 4th century AD, actually accepted Christianity. He made Christianity the state religion. So how did it become the state religion? In the past, the Roman Empire worshipped all kinds of other gods, not the Christian God. They worshipped things like the sun god and all sorts of other gods, some from the water, some from the sky. Basically, they worshipped a bunch of pagan gods. So, with all these gods being worshipped, what did they do? How could they turn Christianity into the state religion of Rome and merge it all together? So, around the 3rd to 4th century AD, the Roman Church came up with a way. They thought about how to blend Christianity with the existing worship of the sun god, water gods, and all these other things. Basically, how to mix them all together. How did they do it? They realized that December 25th just happened to be the birthday of the Roman sun god. December 25th also often coincided with the winter solstice, the coldest time of winter. So the winter solstice was also considered the sun god's birthday. So they thought, well, since the sun god's birthday is also a pagan holiday, and the winter solstice is the coldest time of the year, the sun god needs warmth, and everyone wants to celebrate the sun god's birthday. So what does the birth of Jesus represent? It represents the arrival of light. At that time, the Roman Church combined the birth of Jesus, the arrival of light, with their local traditional beliefs, specifically the sun god's birthday, merging them together. This way, people in Rome who originally weren't Christians could naturally do what? They could accept Christianity and make it the state religion of Rome, because December 25th happened to be the sun god's birthday. So over time, December 25th gradually became Christmas Day. So just to share with everyone and give a little background, this is why Christmas isn't on January 1st, but on December 25th. The origin is related to the Roman Church. Alright, that's just something to chat about with everyone. As for whether it's true or not, I don't really know. I wasn't born back then anyway. Back in the 300s or 400s AD, I wasn't someone from the 3rd or 4th century either, so anyway, that's just how it is. Theologians gradually explored this, and archaeologists slowly uncovered and discovered that, hey, actually January 1st, and as for June 25th, well, actually December 25th, to be honest, it really isn't the day Jesus was born. Whether in theological research or in the Bible itself, the Bible doesn't specifically say that December 25th is the day Jesus was born. There's nothing like that. There's absolutely nothing about it, right? It's just that later generations of theologians gradually studied it, including the Roman Church and theological research, and said, oh, so December 25th became Christmas for this reason. Okay, so that's some additional information for everyone about Christmas and Christmas Eve. Now, as for the industry side of things, let's talk about that a bit too. As we chat, it's already 9:30. Let's first take a look at the initial jobless claims numbers, focusing on the market side of things. The latest data for initial jobless claims released at 9:30 shows initial claims are 214,000, lower than expected in previous. As for continuing claims, it reached 1.923 million, higher than expected in previous. Based on this high-frequency job market data, we can say it's a mixed bag, really. A mix of good and bad. The weekly initial claims have dropped a bit, which means the job market isn't as out of control as people might have imagined. But the number of continuing claims has surged to 1.92 million, which shows that even though the job market isn't spiraling, it's still somewhat chaotic. So we're tracking these initial and continuing claims numbers with everyone, based on the data released at 9:30. As long as the job market keeps weakening and cooling down, it will support the Fed in cutting interest rates next year. Situation with the job market. Now, moving on to industry news. All right, about this sparkling water. Yeah, when you recall past history, is it all stuff you learned during your school days? 70 or 80% of it? No, not really, not at all. Sometimes it's just that I'm interested in a certain topic, or, like at night. Sometimes I'm interested in a certain topic, or I just happen to be looking into something recently. Or even when we're watching the news, sometimes they suddenly mention something and you don't really understand it. When you don't understand, you want to look it up to figure it out. Like, why is it this way? So you want to dig deeper. So it's not necessarily knowledge from when I was a student or some history or geography I learned or heard back then. I think most people probably never heard about the origins of Christmas during their school days. At most, you just knew about the birth of Jesus. But over time, as things gradually evolved, I got used to wondering why Christmas isn't on January 1st, but on December 25th. And then I'd go look up some related information and share it with everyone. Okay, now moving on, let me talk a bit about the weight loss drug in terms of the industry chain. Weight loss drugs are selling extremely well right now. The two biggest weight loss drug companies, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, are doing great. As I mentioned, Eli Lilly's stock surged past $1,000 to a new high, while Novo Nordisk's kept breaking through the floor, dropping below $52. Why is there such a huge difference between them? Of course, there are a lot of reasons for that. Whether it's the effectiveness of their drugs or the market's acceptance, there are many factors, and it's hard to cover them all. Fortunately, today, Novo Nordisk got some good news. The US Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, made an announcement. Aha! They've approved this Danish company to launch its oral weight loss drug, which is expected to hit the US market in January next year. For example, Eli Lilly's oral drug is expected to be launched in March next year. So about this, well, you probably know that Novo Nordisk has two pretty famous weight loss drugs under its brand. One is called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, the English name is kind of weird, Wegovy, and the other is called Ozempic. Ozempic sounds like Olympic. Both of these weight loss drugs are administered by injection. Oh, they're both administered by injection. Now this new one is an oral medication, a pill. Of course, it's closely related to these weight loss drugs, and the active ingredients are basically the same. In a 64-week study, they found that for those taking the oral version, after 64 weeks of treatment, how long is 64 weeks? 64 weeks is a little over a year. So what did this 64-week study find? For those taking the oral medication, the average weight loss was 16.6%, which is actually pretty high, almost 20%, and it only costs about $150 per month. Some of Eli Lilly's weight loss drugs include things like Mounjaro, as well as this oral medication, the one that starts with an O, which is kind of hard to pronounce. Or forgliperon, honestly I have no idea how to pronounce it. This oral medication might get approved as early as next March, and Eli Lilly's revenue and profit performance has been extremely strong. In their most recent earnings report, of the $17.6 billion in revenue, nearly $10 billion came from Mounjaro and Zepbound. In the past 2 years, the company has relied on weight loss drugs, and diabetes treatments also contribute significantly to profit. What about Novo Nordisk? Let me tell you all, when it comes to these weight loss drugs, I think oral tablets definitely have their own niche market, because right now, whether it's Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, all these weight loss drugs require subcutaneous injections. As for the way it's administered, it's what we call the skinny shot, just one injection. I've seen it before, because recently some of our friends have been really into these weight loss drugs. Maybe you don't usually exercise much and you can't really control what you eat. When you see a hamburger, you want to eat it. When you see salty chicken, you want to eat that too, right? So since you want to eat but you're too lazy to move, that's when weight loss drugs come into play. These weight loss drugs are basically that skinny shot, a single injection that looks kind of like a pen, like a fountain pen. I heard them say that you have to get an injection once a week. One shot per week, about 2.5 milligrams, or maybe 25 or 50 milligrams. I'm not sure, either 25 or 50 milligrams. So you get one shot, and that shot lasts for a week, and you use it for a month. After using it for a month or two, does it actually work? To be honest, it does work. Some people might lose 2 kilograms, some might lose 5. More or less, it's effective. But it does have its side effects. In the past couple of days, there have been side effects, which might include things like nausea, dizziness, constipation, or loss of appetite. Anyway, there are always some side effects, but it still works. Because after all, you just get a shot, you don't have to exercise, and you lose your appetite, so you lose weight. So it's really a blessing for people who want to lose weight. From what I've heard, the monthly dosage and medication cost is about $300 to $400. That means you get a shot every week for a month, and by the end of the month, it comes out to around 10,000 to 15,000 new Taiwan dollars. So honestly, it's really not cheap at all, and you definitely have to get the shots. As for whether it works, they think it does. And who are the ones seeing results? Why did Eli Lilly's stock price go up so much? It's because people are using this, right? This weight loss shot called Mounjaro. They say Mounjaro works for them. Of course, I'm not using weight loss drugs myself because if I lost any more weight, I'd be in trouble. If I got any skinnier, I'd be way too thin. So for me, I can only say this. Looking ahead, especially in places like the US or even in South China or other Western countries, the thing is, Western diets are higher in fat and salt, with people eating burgers and fried chicken. So honestly, obesity is a real issue for Americans. This has a huge impact on the number of healthy people in their country. So in the US, a lot of people who are obese end up developing things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or even dying from these causes, or from cancer, and many other so-called comorbidities. So their obesity leads to many side effects and comorbidities, which in turn causes the US healthcare system and medical expenses to be very high, and subsidies to increase as well. As a result, the burden on the US has become very heavy. So this is also why Trump has been pushing for these drug prices, whether it's Eli Lilly or the 17 major pharmaceutical companies, to quickly lower the prices of original drugs. Why? Because the demand for these drugs in the US is also very high. If drug prices can be reduced, then of course the burden on the public will also decrease, and the likelihood of inflation will also relatively go down. So moving forward, I think this oral tablet from Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, if it really becomes stably available on the market, this wave could give their revenue and profits another boost. After all, you can imagine it, right? You have to give yourself a shot in the stomach every week. Yes, every week a shot in your belly. Sometimes, well, I personally am not really brave enough to inject myself, like testing blood sugar or whatever. But for people who really want to lose weight, maybe they actually like giving themselves these belly shots. And after doing it, it really works. But in the future, if Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly really come out with this kind of oral pill where you just take a pill and can lose weight, I think it will sell extremely well. Because swallowing a pill is simple, right? It's much easier and less stressful than having to inject yourself in the stomach with a needle. So if the pill really has a weight loss effect, it should sell very well. So just keep an eye on Novo Nordisk for now. Looking at its weekly chart, on the weekly level, it went up 7% this week. Yesterday was quite a big jump, but on the weekly chart, you can see this red 20-week moving average line is still relatively weak. Compared to Eli Lilly, it's a completely different story. Eli Lilly keeps hitting new highs, but Novo Nordisk dropped from $104 all the way down to nearly $40. So honestly, if Novo Nordisk's oral pill really proves effective next January and gets a good market response, then it could get ahead of Eli Lilly. It won't be able to hit the market until March. Just these 2 months, just this short window, if Novo Nordisk can regain its market share during this period, it would definitely help its stock price, revenue, and profits. But the first condition is, when it launches next year, how will its reputation actually be? We don't know yet if there will be any side effects or any secondary issues, so everyone is just keeping an eye on it for now. Not only has it already passed FDA approval and can be launched, but secondly, from a technical perspective, if it really is safer than this red 20-week moving average, if this red 20-week moving average really starts to curve upward from its decline, or even flattens out, I think that would be a relatively safe technical entry or stabilization point. After that, it would be enough to look for a buying opportunity. Okay, so for the fundamentals, just pay attention to how its reputation is when it launches in January next year. For the technicals, wait until this 20-day moving average really flattens out from its decline. If you really want to buy Novo Nordisk on a dip, then consider it at that point. Otherwise, at this stage, the strongest performer is still Eli Lilly. So I just wanted to add that here. Some people say it's expensive. Yeah, 0.79 is expensive. If you want to find a young, fresh-faced coach, you have to pay for it. Actually, coaches aren't cheap either. People might not realize, but when we go to the gym, it seems like hiring a coach for a session, I don't even know how much it costs. I think they charge by the hour, like an hourly rate. The fitness coach will just tell you how to do pull-ups, how to do them so you don't get hurt, and what supplements you should take. Protein guidance and all that. Basically, the fitness coach is a really important part of the gym's business. They sell a lot of products, or they'll tell you how to train your body. So fitness coaches definitely have their advantages, but as I recall, their fees aren't cheap either. Just now, Kaiser asked about this. Yeah, prices have gone up by 7%. That's the current rate. Is it suitable? Well, I still think it's like I just said. If you're a more conservative investor, you should wait for 2 things. First, after it goes public in January next year, see what the reputation is like. Second, from a technical perspective, wait until the 20 or 20-week moving average levels out and becomes more stable. Then look for a buying opportunity. I think that's a safer approach, something you should definitely consider. Let me just mention one last thing. Since it's Christmas today, I wanted to add a bit more, and now I've ended up talking for 40 minutes. SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation, said that they plan to increase the price of some of their production capacity by 10%. Why is that? The reason is that with the booming development of mobile applications and AI demand, they believe the demand for semiconductor products has increased, so there's a possibility they'll raise prices by 10%. If SMIC is going to raise prices by 10%, then for relatively higher-end, more advanced process, high-end chips, TSMC is also worth watching to see if there might be a story about chip price increases. Actually, there are 2 pieces of information here. One is that TSMC is currently integrating the production capacity of its 8-inch wafer fabs, and there are plans to shut down part of the capacity, some of the production lines, by 2027. This could also trigger a story about wafer fab price increases. They might repurpose these production lines for more advanced processes, or shut down the lower-end, more outdated lines, and shift their focus and resources to the high-end segment, such as 2 nanometer, 1.5 nanometer, 3 nanometer, and so on. Previously, This is related to the development of higher-end, higher-margin chips for AI, such as the AI 757 AI chip, and the trend is moving toward more advanced chips for online applications. If things go in this direction, it will naturally help TSMC raise the prices of its chips. Actually, aside from this topic, this trend was already evident back in November. There were already rumors circulating as early as this November, saying that TSMC's chips below 5 nanometers would see price increases of 3 to 5% for 4 consecutive years. This is just a rumor. TSMC hasn't confirmed it, but they haven't denied it either. Anyway, the market is talking about this. If TSMC really does go ahead with this price hike, it would definitely indicate that the demand for these high-end chips is extremely strong. On the flip side, this also reflects the strong outlook for these high-end chips. In other words, the current AI industry isn't quite in a bubble yet. The valuations might be high, but it's not really a bubble. If there were a bubble, then there wouldn't be such strong demand for TSMC's high-end chips, and these large tech companies wouldn't keep ramping up their capital expenditures from $50 billion, $60 billion, up to $70 or $80 billion. If order demand wasn't that high, capital expenditures wouldn't keep rising. If order demand wasn't so strong, if there really was an AI bubble, then TSMC's demand, revenue, and profits wouldn't be this robust. So in the short term, I think that in the next 1 to 2 years, AI won't be in a bubble yet. However, some companies have indeed risen quite a lot, or for certain individual companies, there are issues in their industry, such as cash turnover or cash flow. Some of these do have problems, that's true. So you need to be especially careful. It's not always as it seems. It's not going to be a case where everyone benefits equally, or where everything rises together, at least under the premise that AI won't be in a bubble in the next year or two. You need to be cautious with some companies, but for most companies, there's still a chance for continued growth. That includes companies like TSMC, which is also worth paying special attention to. As for TSMC, it went up by 1.25% yesterday, staying above the monthly and quarterly moving averages, so you need to keep holding steady. If you can hold steady, then you can just follow along and watch it gradually climb up step by step. So at the moment, TSMC's fundamentals are still solid, and looking ahead to next year, as long as TSMC doesn't have any major issues. If it doesn't weaken, then the Taiwan stock market, the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, or Taiwan stock market shouldn't be too weak. When watching the Taiwan or US stock market, consider TSMC's performance and fundamentals. Regarding the US stock market, pre-market. Nike. So what's up with Nike? Today, in pre-market trading, Nike went up by 2.2%. Why did Nike surge? There was a small piece of news. Apple CEO Tim Cook, everyone knows that back in 2005, or was it 2015? Anyway, a long time ago, he became an independent director at Nike, as well as the chairman of the compensation committee. He's held that position for a long time, up until now. So seeing Nike stock keep dropping, it seems that yesterday he bought an additional $3 million worth of Nike stock. $3 million, honestly, it's not that much, but still, the market sentiment gets pretty fired up. People are like, wow, even Cook is buying. Cook is supporting Nike. Don't forget, Cook is an independent director at Nike, so it's kind of like he's stepping up to show his support for Nike. That's basically the idea. That's why Nike went up 2.2% in pre-market trading today. Also, there are some other cases like this. Energy companies like Constellation Energy, financial firms like Jefferies Financial, and Freeport-McMoRan, Copper and Gold, along with other metals, precious metals, and power generation companies saw stocks rise in pre-market trading. Defense companies like Lockheed Martin also rose 0.5% pre-market. So what about the companies that went down? Well, Intel dropped by 3%. There's some news about this. Originally, NVIDIA was supposed to collaborate with Intel, including using Intel's 18A process, but now there are rumors going around that NVIDIA isn't all that satisfied after looking at Intel's process. So they might not want to use Intel's 18A process. With this topic off the table, Intel stock dropped more before the market opened today, down 3%. Also, Coinbase fell by 0.8%. NVIDIA slipped slightly by 0.58% in pre-market trading, and so did Meta. Overall, I think today is Christmas Eve. Hey Amy, good evening. On Christmas Eve, as far as I remember, the US stock market usually closes around 2 a.m. today, and then tomorrow the market is closed. Trading will resume on the 26th. So that's the situation for US stocks today. I think it'll just end with minor ups and downs, not much volatility, since most people are already on holiday. The real trading will probably happen on the 26th, and then when most of the institutional investors and retail traders are back in action, that's when things will really pick up. Maybe we'll have to wait until after New Year's, after all the Christmas and New Year's holidays are over, and people come back after New Year's. At that point, trading volume and market volatility will be more noticeable, and things will get more interesting. So that's a quick update on related companies before the US stock market opens. The Dow Jones Index is doing pretty well, staying above the monthly and quarterly moving averages, and gradually moving higher, so there's still a chance it could hit a new high. As for the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, it's also above the monthly and quarterly moving averages. But just a quick reminder, around Christmas, if you see a short-term rally, it's a good idea to take some profits if your stocks hit new highs. Better to lock in some gains. Then, if the market pulls back to the moving averages, you can buy back in at a lower price, which is a safer approach. What about the Magnificent 7 index? With Nvidia's big surge yesterday, it pushed the Magnificent 7 index up by 1%. There's a really good chance that as it keeps moving along, it could hit new highs again. Very, very likely. So looking ahead to 2026, what's the outlook for the Magnificent 7? There's still a major driving force and a huge confidence indicator for the US stock market. So everyone should keep watching and paying close attention. All right, that's all for the content related to this cycle. Keep it up, and shout out to Intel CEO. That's it for today's content. When class is over, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And tomorrow, since it's Christmas, our group will be taking a break for one day. Good night, everyone. When class is over, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Wishing everyone smooth trading. See you on Friday.
Our company has no improper financial interests in the individual securities recommended or analyzed. The information in this program is for reference only. Investors should make independent judgments, evaluate carefully, and bear their own investment risks. If you don't want to miss the latest market updates, be sure to turn on the notification bell and hit subscribe. In addition, we have plenty of great video content on both Facebook and YouTube. Don't miss out. In our group, we share in-depth explanations of global financial events with you every day.